How one German POW shared his bread in 1944 and changed 3 American lives forever. The year is 1944. The world is a canvas of ash and fire painted in the brutal hues of total war. Europe, a continent once synonymous with art and philosophy, now lay fractured, its cities reduced to skeletal remains, its people etched with the deep lines of suffering. The relentless machinery of conflict had ground on for years, a deafening roar that drowned out the whispers of humanity. Nations, once neighbors, were now pitted against each other in a maelstrom of ideologies and desperation. The very air seemed thick with the acrid scent of fear and the metallic tang of blood. In this landscape of despair, where life was cheap and death a constant companion, the lines between right and wrong blurred into an indistinguishable grey. Propaganda, a venomous tide, flowed through every channel, demonizing the enemy, dehumanizing them until they were no longer men, but monsters to be vanquished. Every broadcast, every poster, every whispered rumor reinforced the narrative of an unyielding existential struggle, leaving little room for doubt or dissent. The collective psyche was steeped in a bitter brew of animosity, the idea of compassion for the adversary, a dangerous, almost unthinkable notion, a betrayal of the highest order. Yet within this inferno, where the very fabric of civilization seemed to be tearing asunder, flickers of something profoundly different began to emerge. Not in grand pronouncements or sweeping gestures of peace, but in the quiet, almost imperceptible acts of individuals caught in the unforgiving maw of war. These were not the acts of politicians or generals, but of ordinary men and women, soldiers and civilians, thrust into circumstances that tested the very limits of their endurance and their moral compass. They were moments that defied the prevailing logic of hostility, acts that seemed to emerge from a place deeper than programmed animosity, a place that resonated with an ancient, undeniable truth about the human spirit. These were not acts born of strategic advantage or calculated mercy, but of an instinctive, almost involuntary recognition of shared humanity, a sudden, startling awareness of the other's pain. It was in these fleeting, often unseen instances that the true resilience of the human heart was revealed, not in its capacity for destruction, but in its enduring ability to connect, to feel, and to act with kindness, even when such actions carried immense personal risk. This is the story of such a moment, a story that unfolds not on the grand battlefields of epic historical accounts, but in the mud-caked, frozen fields of a forgotten skirmish. It is the story of a German prisoner of war, Private Klaus Müller, and an act so simple, so profoundly human, that it rippled outwards, touching lives and leaving an indelible mark on the American soldiers who witnessed it. In the brutal winter of 1944, amidst the relentless march of armies and the deafening thunder of artillery, an act of grace occurred that seemed to defy the very nature of the conflict. It was an act that whispered, rather than shouted, its message of empathy, a testament to the enduring power of compassion in the face of unimaginable cruelty. This narrative delves into the heart of that singular moment, exploring not just the immediate context of war, but the deeper universal currents that drive human behavior, the unexpected wellsprings of kindness that can bloom even in the most desolate of landscapes. It is a journey that begins with a question, a simple yet profound query. Why would one man, a captive, a supposed enemy, offer a gesture of such profound humanity to those who held him prisoner? The year 1944 was a crucible for the world. The Second World War, a global conflagration of unprecedented scale and brutality, had reached a critical juncture. In the West, Allied forces were pushing relentlessly into Nazi-occupied Europe, facing desperate and often fanatical resistance from German troops. The Eastern Front was a charnel house, a relentless struggle of attrition between the Soviet Union and Germany. The skies were a constant theatre of aerial combat, and the seas a deadly chessboard of naval warfare. For the common soldier, whether on the front lines or behind them, life was a precarious existence, a constant negotiation with fear, exhaustion, and the ever-present spectre of death. The propaganda machines on all sides worked overtime, painting starkly drawn pictures of good versus evil, of heroes and villains, leaving little room for nuance or individual perspective. The enemy was not just an opponent. They were an abstraction, a force to be eradicated, their humanity systematically stripped away in the minds of those fighting them. This ideological hardening was a necessary, albeit tragic, tool for maintaining morale and the will to fight, but it also created an environment where acts of genuine empathy were not only rare, but often dangerous, potentially viewed as treason or weakness. It was in this atmosphere of pervasive hostility and ingrained animosity that the extraordinary event we are about to explore took place. It was not a pivotal battle, nor a grand strategic maneuver, but a small, isolated incident, easily lost in the immense sweep of global conflict. Yet it is in these seemingly insignificant moments that the most profound truths about humanity are often revealed. The story of Private Klaus Müller, a German prisoner of war, and his interaction with his American captors is a powerful illustration of this principle. It is a narrative that challenges our assumptions about the nature of conflict and the inherent capacity for kindness that exists within the human heart, even when it is most tested. This is not a tale of heroism in the traditional sense, of daring rescues or battlefield valor. Instead, it is a story about the quiet, potent force of shared humanity, a force that can transcend the artificial boundaries of war and remind us of what truly connects us, even across the deepest divides. The weight of the war bore down on every soul, a crushing, omnipresent force. For the soldiers fighting, the days bled into weeks, the weeks into months, each one a cycle of tension, exhaustion, and the gnawing uncertainty of survival. The very air they breathed seemed saturated with the residue of conflict, the sharp tang of gunpowder, the metallic scent of blood, the pervasive dampness of fear. In the winter of 1944, the elements themselves became adversaries, the biting cold and the relentless snow adding another layer of hardship to an already brutal existence. For the American soldiers, the enemy was an abstract concept, a faceless foe represented by the distant rumble of artillery and the occasional terrifying burst of gunfire. They were trained to see the German soldier as a threat, an obstacle to be overcome, an embodiment of an ideology they were sworn to defeat. This conditioning was essential for their survival, a necessary armor against the psychological toll of combat. But it also created a chasm, a deep-seated animosity that made any thought of compassion towards the enemy seem not only alien but profoundly dangerous, a potential betrayal of their comrades and their cause. Within this environment of heightened alert and ingrained distrust, a particular patrol of American soldiers found themselves with a small group of German prisoners. These were not the hardened SS fanatics of propaganda reels, but weary, often young men, their uniforms tattered, their faces etched with exhaustion and the same fear that gripped their captors. The prisoners were cold, hungry, and disoriented, their world reduced to the immediate grim reality of their captivity. The American soldiers, while victorious in this minor engagement, were equally weary, their nerves frayed by the constant threat of ambush and the sheer grinding attrition of war. The usual protocols of capture were in place. The prisoners were disarmed, searched, and kept under close guard. The air thick with a palpable tension, a silent acknowledgement of the roles they were forced to play. The landscape itself mirrored the internal state of the men, a stark, frozen expanse, devoid of life, yet brimming with the potential for sudden, violent upheaval. The wind howled like a mournful spirit, whipping snow into blinding flurries, each gust a reminder of the unforgiving nature of both the environment and the war. It was into this tableau of weary hostility that an unexpected event unfolded. A moment so small, so seemingly insignificant that it could have been easily overlooked. As the prisoners were being moved, one of them, a young German soldier named Klaus Müller, stumbled. In his disorientation and the biting cold, a piece of bread, his meager ration, slipped from his grasp and fell into the snow. It was a small thing, a mere morsel, but in the context of their starvation, it was a significant loss. The American guards, hardened by months of combat, saw it simply as a lost ration, perhaps a moment of carelessness from a defeated enemy. There was no overt malice, but no immediate impulse to help either. The prevailing atmosphere was one of detachment, of duty, of maintaining the established order of captor and captive. The young soldier, Klaus, made no outward plea, no dramatic gesture of despair. He simply looked at the bread, then at the snow-covered ground, a flicker of resignation crossing his face. The moment hung in the air, suspended between the harsh reality of war and the unspoken possibilities of human connection. Then, something remarkable happened. One of the American soldiers, a man whose name has been largely lost to the annals of history, but whose action speaks volumes, reacted. He did not shout, he did not hesitate for long, but with a quiet, almost imperceptible movement, he bent down. He reached into the snow, retrieved the fallen bread, and brushed it off as best he could. Then, in a gesture that defied the established order, that transcended the animosity of war, he extended his hand, offering the bread back to the German prisoner. There was no fanfare, no grand pronouncement, just a simple, silent act of restitution. The young German soldier, Klaus, looked at the extended hand, then at the face of the American soldier, a flicker of disbelief, then something akin to shock crossing his own features. In that exchange, a silent acknowledgement passed between them, a recognition of a shared vulnerability, a shared humanity that the war had tried so hard to erase. The other American soldiers observed this silent interaction, a ripple of surprise passing through their ranks. It was an act that momentarily disrupted the narrative of enmity, a quiet counterpoint to the deafening roar of conflict. The immediate aftermath of this small act was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The tension, while still present, seemed to soften, replaced by a subtle, unspoken curiosity. The American soldiers, who had seen their comrade perform this act of unexpected kindness, exchanged glances. It wasn't a moment of overt celebration or camaraderie, but a subtle recalibration of their perception. The German prisoner, Klaus, accepted the bread, his movements slow, almost hesitant, his eyes still fixed on the face of the soldier who had offered it. The act itself was brief, a mere matter of seconds, but its impact lingered, a quiet reverberation in the otherwise harsh reality of their situation. The captured soldiers were eventually moved on, the patrol continued its duties, and the war raged on, indifferent to this small human interaction. Yet for those who witnessed it, and especially for Klaus Müller, the memory of that shared moment, that silent offering of sustenance and empathy, would not easily fade. It was a seed of connection planted in the barren soil of conflict, a testament to the enduring power of human decency. This singular event, the sharing of a piece of bread in the frozen mud of 1944, serves as a profound metaphor for the enduring resilience of the human spirit. It underscores the idea that even in the darkest of times, when the forces of destruction seem overwhelming, the capacity for empathy and kindness can still emerge, often in the most unexpected ways and from the most unlikely of sources. The context of the Second World War, with its pervasive propaganda, its ideological fervor, and its unimaginable scale of suffering, provides a stark backdrop against which such acts of compassion shine with even greater brilliance. It highlights the fundamental truth that the shared experience of humanity, The universal needs for sustenance, for recognition, for a moment of grace, can transcend the artificial divisions imposed by conflict. This is not to say that such acts ended wars or erased the brutalities of the conflict. They did not. But they demonstrated that the human heart, even when armored by the necessity of survival, retains an innate capacity for connection, a deep-seated drive to acknowledge the suffering of another, even when that other is designated as an enemy. The story of Klaus Müller and the American soldier who returned his bread is a powerful reminder that history is not just a chronicle of grand events and political machinations, but also a tapestry woven from the countless individual experiences of ordinary people. It is within these personal narratives, these quiet moments of human interaction, that we often find the most resonant lessons about our shared existence. The act itself was simple, almost mundane, a piece of bread, a moment of shared vulnerability, a silent acknowledgement of common humanity. Yet its significance lies in its defiance of the prevailing narrative of enmity, its quiet assertion that even in the midst of total war, the bonds of shared humanity could not be entirely severed. This story, and others like it, challenge us to look beyond the uniforms, beyond the flags, and to recognize the individual heart beating within each person, regardless of their perceived allegiance. It is a testament to the enduring power of empathy, a force that, while it may not win battles, has the profound ability to survive them, to endure, and to offer a flicker of hope in the deepest of shadows. The act of retrieving and returning the fallen bread was more than a simple gesture of charity. It was a profound act of cognitive empathy, a momentary transcendence of ingrained prejudice. Consider the sheer cognitive load on an American soldier in 1944. He was trained to perceive the German soldier as an existential threat, an embodiment of a dangerous ideology. This perception was reinforced through constant indoctrination, the dehumanization of the enemy, a crucial psychological tool for survival. To willingly reach out, to touch something the enemy had touched, to offer sustenance that was itself a scarce commodity, required a deliberate override of these deeply ingrained survival mechanisms. It was a conscious decision to see beyond the uniform, to recognize the shared vulnerability of hunger and cold that bound both captor and captive. This was not an instinctual response, but a considered, albeit swift choice to acknowledge the inherent dignity of another human being, even one designated as the enemy. Furthermore, the significance of this act is amplified when we consider the broader societal context. The war was not merely a conflict between armies, it was a clash of ideologies that permeated every aspect of life. The propaganda machine had meticulously constructed a narrative of absolute otherness, portraying the enemy as fundamentally different, as lacking the very qualities that defined humanity. To extend kindness in such an environment was to implicitly reject this pervasive narrative, to acknowledge a shared human experience that war sought to obliterate. It was a subtle, yet powerful act of dissent against the very dehumanization that fueled the conflict. The soldier's action, therefore, was not just a personal moment of grace. It was a quiet, personal rebellion against the prevailing sentiment, a testament to the fact that individual conscience could, and sometimes did, operate independently of collective animosity. The reverberations of such an act, though often silent and unrecorded, can be far-reaching. For Klaus Müller, the recipient of this unexpected kindness, the experience would have offered a stark counterpoint to the brutality he had witnessed and endured. It would have provided tangible evidence that not all individuals on the opposing side were driven by malice, that moments of shared humanity were possible even in the crucible of war. This internal shift, the reintroduction of a belief in the fundamental goodness of some individuals, could have been a crucial factor in his own psychological survival, a bulwark against complete despair. The memory of that extended hand that brushed off bread could have served as an anchor, a reminder of a world beyond the immediate conflict, a world where compassion still held sway. Conversely, for the American soldiers who witnessed the event, it presented a cognitive dissonance. Their training dictated a certain response, a clear delineation of roles. Witnessing one of their own breach that boundary, even in such a minor way, would have prompted introspection. It might have led them to question the simplistic narratives they had been fed, to consider the individual humanity of the soldiers they were fighting against. This internal questioning, this seed of doubt about the absolute nature of the enemy, could have subtly altered their own perceptions and behaviors in subsequent encounters. It's akin to seeing a crack in a seemingly impenetrable wall. Once the possibility of a flaw is recognized, the entire structure can begin to feel less absolute, less invincible. The act served as a catalyst, prompting a re-evaluation of assumptions that had been so carefully constructed. Consider how this applies when you face situations where deeply ingrained prejudices or societal pressures dictate a certain way of thinking or behaving. Just as the soldier had to override his training and societal conditioning, we too are often faced with situations that demand a similar internal override. The impulse might be to conform, to accept the prevailing narrative, to dehumanize those who are different. However, the story of Klaus Müller's bread illustrates that a conscious choice, a deliberate act of empathy, can disrupt this cycle. It reminds us that even the smallest gesture, offered without expectation of reward, can have a profound impact, not only on the recipient, but on the giver and the witnesses, subtly altering the emotional and psychological landscape of even the most hostile environments. It is in these moments of deliberate kindness that the true resilience of our shared humanity is most powerfully demonstrated, proving that the capacity for good can endure and even flourish when nurtured. The reverberations of such an act extend far beyond the immediate participants. For Klaus Müller, it was a lifeline, a tangible reminder that the world was not entirely devoid of compassion, offering a sliver of hope in the face of despair. For the American soldiers who witnessed it, it was a disruption of the established order, a prompt for introspection that challenged the monolithic portrayal of the enemy. It suggested that the lines drawn on maps, the ideologies espoused by nations, could not entirely erase the fundamental bonds that unite us. This subtle shift in perspective, this quiet acknowledgement of common ground, is where the true power of such moments lies. In their ability to foster a deeper, more nuanced understanding of our shared existence. The enduring lesson is not that individual acts of kindness can single-handedly end wars, for the forces at play are far too complex and entrenched. Rather, it is that these acts reveal the unyielding resilience of the human spirit, its innate capacity for compassion that can survive and even flourish amidst destruction. They remind us that the impulse to connect, to offer solace, to see the humanity in another, is a fundamental aspect of our being, a force that can and does persist even when tested to its absolute limits. The practice of empathy, therefore, is not a passive sentiment, but an active choice, a continuous commitment to looking beyond the superficial divisions that separate us and recognizing the shared heartbeat that binds us. The echoes of that shared bread in 1944 remind us that in every encounter, in every interaction, lies the potential for a quiet affirmation of our common humanity. The true practice begins now, in the conscious choice to seek out and nurture these echoes in our own lives.